proving something is the exercise of making something obvious that wasn't obvious before. And therefore, it involves going from what is obviously true to showing what obviously follows from what is true. And as we said in our last video, therefore, we are looking at, when we critique an argument, what is the evidence, and does the evidence warrant the conclusion? Is there a strong enough logical connection for us to go from the evidence to the conclusion? Now, when we reason, we do this in two distinct ways. We either reason deductively or inductively. Let's talk about the difference. A deductive proof is one that makes a certain claim. One that may not pan out in the end, but it's the kind of claim that's being made, that we are demonstrating the conclusion with absolute certainty. So a deductive argument claims to make the conclusion absolutely certain. If the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. That's the claim of a deductive argument. And so that's the standard we set when we judge a deductive argument, whether it's a sound or a good argument. But then there are weaker forms of argument that are used more in science and experiments and observation. For example, we might want to prove that anyone who smokes, there's a high probability that they're going to develop cancer as a result if they smoke long enough because of nicotine and tar. That kind of argument is what we call an inductive argument. It's an argument that claims that the evidence leads to the conclusion not with absolute certainty, but only with a high probability. So if you're familiar with the play Annie, you remember her song that the sun will come out tomorrow. Bet your bottom dollar that tomorrow there will be sun. There she's making an inductive argument. The sun has always come out before. Every time in the course of human history we have expected the sun to come out the next day, it came out. Therefore tomorrow it will probably come out again. Doesn't sound as good as a musical, but that's really what's going on. And so when we judge in philosophy arguments, we first ask the question, is this a deductive or is this an inductive argument? If we say it's inductive, then we're asking, does the conclusion follow from the premises with high probability, like the sun coming out tomorrow, or like smoking leads to cancer? But if the claim is a deductive one, then we have a much higher standard. Does the conclusion follow with absolute certainty? Are we forced, once we accept the evidence, to accept the conclusion? Now in philosophy, because we're dealing with the most general questions of human existence, we're dealing with the idea of what is human nature, what is the nature of reality, what is the good, and we're looking at the totality of our evidence and what kind of certainty we can have as a result of that evidence, then we're mainly dealing with deductive arguments. And so I'm going to use an example of a deductive argument to show you how to critique one and what makes an argument a bad one in this case. So take a look at the board. Here we have an argument about evolution and its truth. Our first one goes like this. If evolution is true, then there will be a gradual progression in the fossil record from simple to complex life forms. That's our first premise in the argument. There is this progression, we observe it to be the case, and so therefore, those three little dots just mean therefore. It's the conclusion indicator in the argument. We put the premises above the line, the conclusion below the line with these three dots. Therefore, if these are true, then it follows the claim is said that evolution is true. Now, let's look at the evidence. Where do we usually get evidence from? There are two ways we get evidence for these two things. First, through what we call observation, through our general experience. When we take a look at number two, we see that is how we got the evidence for number two. every scientist will agree that there is this progression, that once we have started digging and excavating into the strata of the history of our planet, we do find this gradual progression of life forms from the simple single-celled organisms all the way up to the present complexity of life. So we got that from observation. But, number one, the claim is that this is just an obvious logical truth, that the point of evolution is we are claiming that the very meaning of evolution is that of a gradual progression. And so if we do not observe a gradual progression, then we're not talking about evolution anymore. Here are some other obvious logical truths. Between any 2 points, the shortest distance between any 2 points is a straight line. Except, of course, in Boston, where the shortest distance between any 2 points is under construction. Sorry, I had to throw in a bad joke for my fans out there. So we claim 1 is just an obvious logical principle. We claim 2 is something we've observed. And therefore, if these 2 are obvious, the claim is it obviously follows that evolution is true. And this is a tempting conclusion to draw. The premises seem firm, but does the evidence warrant the conclusion? The claim I will tell you is no. Actually, we could accept both of these premises, but evolution still not be true. And this is the reason why. Take another argument of the same form. If there's fire, then there's oxygen. This is obvious because that is the very meaning or nature of fire, that it is oxidation, a certain type of oxidation occurring through heating of a substance. So, therefore, it's obvious that if there's fire, then there's oxygen. Now, in this room right now, there is oxygen, as you can tell from me still being alive. But there is no fire. So if I made the argument, if there's fire, then there's oxygen. There is oxygen, therefore there is fire, that wouldn't follow. Even though if there were fire, there would be oxygen. This argument has the same form. If there's evolution is true, then there will be this gradual progression. There is this gradual progression, but it does not logically or deductively follow, therefore evolution is true. Other reasons could account for why there's this progression. For example, maybe God creates gradually and starts with the simple, and then once God has gotten that simple life form down, decides to create something more complex. That would comport just as well with the evidence. So, therefore, the first way we critique an argument is to show that the logical connection doesn't follow. These both are true, but it doesn't follow that this is true. And therefore, this is not a good deductive argument, even though the evidence is good. So what if we change the argument so that it would follow? This is what we see in the blue over here. Here we've changed around the first premise. Now we're going to say not if evolution is true, then there's this gradual progression. Instead, we're going to say if there is this gradual progression in the life record, then evolution is true. There is this progression, therefore evolution is true. This does follow. In other words, if both of these are true, then it does follow that evolution is true. Just like if I said, if there's oxygen, then there's fire. There is oxygen, therefore there's fire. If both of those are true, then it will follow that there's fire. The only problem is the evidence isn't good. Now we can question whether one is true. Does it follow that just because there's a gradual progression observed in the fossil record, that therefore then evolution is true? Is that if-then statement or hypothetical statement obvious? And the answer is no, it's not. Maybe this could be accounted for in a different way. And so therefore, we get the second method of critiquing. We agree that if 1 and 2 are true, then it follows that evolution is true. But the evidence isn't good. One can be questioned. And so therefore, again, we have two ways to critique an argument, and therefore our two standards for what makes for a sound or good deductive argument, a good proof. Are the premises true? Can we question them? And even if the premises are true, does the conclusion follow with absolute certainty?